I forget where this is from. It's from Ramana Maharshi, but I don't know what location, what word location it's from. But Ramana says, all that is required to realize the self is to be still. Not many requirements then, yeah? When he says self, of course, as the absolute, not like the 12 steps or the big book would say self, referring to individual, the sense of individuality. But when he's talking about self, let's say big S self or whatever, yeah? So the only requirement, all that is required to realize the self is to be still. The topic at hand here is not two. Non-duality, let's say. Advaita in the Hindu sense, or Chan Zen in the Buddhist sense, maybe. But all that is required is to be still. So the message of not to is a negation, essentially, of what you're not. Yeah. There's a rising or an appearance constantly happening, which is popping up in a sense of two-ness. Now the two-ness comes from the sense of me-ness, essentially. So there's a sense of subjectivity, and that sense of subjectivity appears with the word me or I. Yeah, when that I pops up through the mental presentation, let's say, or as they would say, a sense of individuality, there's a sense that this is a long-lasting thing, that this is an independent, autonomous thing. And this independent, autonomous thing has a sense of subjectivity, and that is the sense of individuality. So when that subjectivity pops up, it pops up in the game of two. So, meaning there's a sense of being the subject, and that would put everything else in the arena of objects. That obviously is two, subject, object. This is saying not to, quite directly and simply, really. That's one of the beauties of the non-duality Advaita thing. It's quite simple, really. The idea is simple. It's like the 12 steps. It's presented in a book. It's an open book test, really. And the idea is quite simple. So whatever appears as two, you are not. So there's the sense of subjectivity or the sense of individuality, which is trying to become free through the object of spiritual practice. So you are not the object of spiritual practice, nor are you the sense of subjectivity, which is immersing itself in the sense of spiritual practice, hoping to get out of the dualistic arena. But the sense of individuality in the body is it's of a dualistic nature. It's of a subject-object nature. And it can't go beyond that. So for a long time, I was trying to make this thing into a non-judgmental thing of oneness. But its nature is two-ness. So it can't get there in many ways, yeah? So this is a negation, meaning meeting two-ness with the message that I'm not of two-ness. My nature, my true nature is not of two-ness. And two-ness cannot become oneness. That failed in my experiments. In my spiritual experiments, that failed. And it's great because then I was able to hear that why it failed. And it made a lot of sense because two-ness was trying to become oneness, and two-ness can't become oneness. So in that two relationship of two-ness, the sense of individuality being the ultimate subject with a bunch of objects, there's not stillness in that relationship. So the sense of subjectivity, me, I am meeting a bunch of different objects through the senses, essentially. And that is two-ness, but it's not a still relationship. There's no stillness there. So the other thing in spiritual practice that happens that we're trying to attain is stillness. Like I am going to become stillness. But that I is its nature is two-ness, meaning it's in relationship to other things, which means it ain't staying still. Stillness is an ever-present stillness, the open space, let's say, in which that two-ness operates in. So when we look at the not two, it's a negation. This is not a becoming, because whatever's trying to become is a relationship of two-ness. If there is a sense of individuality arising, that's for sure. That is always trying to become or unbecome something, and that immediately puts you in the arena of two-ness, yeah? That arena of two-ness is appearing in space with this thing we call time, and that's fine, but you are not that, yes? So when you try to become not two as a system which nature is two-ness, you will continue to fail. And that will go on, essentially. And it manifests in spiritual practice. It could happen in recovery as well. It just goes on, yeah? In recovery, they say self can't get out of self. And that's essentially saying that the sense of being an individual, which its nature is of two-ness, cannot get out of two-ness. Now, that sense of individuality will continue to attempt to get out of being an individual. It will continue to attempt to get out of two-ness, yeah, under the idea that it can become something else, but that idea is false. You are not what is appearing as two-ness. That's really the message. So when Ramana says all that is required is to be still, really what it points out is what can't be still, which is the sense of me. The me-ness cannot hold still because it's in the dualistic relationship, yeah? The idea of J comes and goes, essentially. There's no thing called J. And because of that, it's a thing that appears and disappears, which is not stillness, yeah? So he's saying all that is required is to be still. But what we're identified as, when we're identified with the body, cannot be still. So really the only move is a negation. You meet what is moving with negation in the path, let's say, the path or whatever you want to call it. So it's seeing the head pop up, and it will continue to pop up with a bunch of thoughts and ideas based on the idea I, or me. I is like the first thought of the dualistic relationship. Everything else comes after the sense of I. Because without the I, the sense of individuality would not arise. But the thought I is there, yeah? You're not doing that thought. It's like a program mechanism. It just happens. Yeah? So, as Ramana would say, there's a presupposing of a non-existent thing, which is the thought I. Presupposing meaning like it's already a done deal before you play a part in that arising. And as soon as that I comes up, it's in the relationship of duality with a bunch of objects, including thoughts. So thoughts are like the objects of the sense of subjectivity of me. Those thoughts have no power, but if they're my thoughts, they seem to have a lot of power. So this is a negation of the thoughts, yes, and then the sense of me who's seeing or owning those thoughts, being the thinker. And then you land in what you are, which is nameless, really, because any name put on it would come after it. So all that is required is to be still. Ramana has this other one where he says all that is required is to see the unreal. So whatever's moving is met as unreal. Now unreality in this sense means a lack of autonomy or individuality. So the mental system is definite, it's taking itself to be reality, meaning the sense of I is taking itself Yeah, that's beautiful. The sense of I is taking itself to be an independent, autonomous thing. It's taking itself to be a subject, yeah? Me. That sense or the thought me is taking itself to be an autonomous subject. But that individuality is false. So the head is taking itself to be reality, but it's really the unreality. Now, if we're listening to the mental system, it's playing God. Like the other day we were talking a lot about that idea of playing God. So Ramana says that the head is a false God, and in 12-step recovery they say you have to stop playing God, which would mean stop living under the complete honorable system of listening to the head. So the head is playing God by interpreting and perceiving everything based on its own story, based on its own interpretation of what's going on, from its sense of being reality as ultimate subjectivity. Yeah. Now that ultimate subjectivity is reliant on objects in many ways. And the objects are super reliant on the sense of subjectivity. So that is a relationship of two-ness. That relationship of two-ness comes and goes, meaning that the sense of me is not a permanent thing. When I go to sleep at night, it's gone, yeah? So that coming and going is not stillness, obviously. There's movement there, yeah? All of that movement is happening within an openness of still space, we could say, just to put some kind of words of getting closer to what we might be. But you ain't that, essentially. So when he says all that is required is to be still, he's pointing out what can't stay still is not you. And what can't stay still is that sense of subjectivity in relation to object. Whether that be objects seemingly outside of the body or objects seemingly inside the body, which would be emotions or thoughts or sensations claimed by the head as mine. My thoughts is a dualistic statement. There's my and then there's thoughts. My emotions is a dualistic statement. There's a sense of two-ness there, and you are not of two-ness. Yeah? And it's very important to see that you are not of two-ness, because two-ness is constantly trying to get out of itself. And it will not ever get out of itself. It cannot get out of itself. Yes? You are not of two-ness. This is freedom from self, not as self. This is not J is going to become free from a dualistic experience. J is part of the movie of duality. Yeah? And it will continue to think that it's going to get out of that movie, but it's part of the movie. A huge part of the movie. It's directing, it thinks it's directing the movie. So then the other one from Ramana is all that is required is to see the unreal, which is everything you can see. Your head is thinking it is reality. Yeah? Your head's taking itself to be God, and its interpretation and perception of the world is taken to be reality. And when you listen to that head, it's taken to be your reality. And he is saying, or Dwight is saying, this is not reality. This is like an awake dreaming, yes? This is not reality, meaning that this thing and that sense of J is not independent and autonomous from its conditioning. That's very informative. Because it's constantly selling everything as a subjective, definite interpretation. Presupposing the existence of a non-existent thing. Yeah, the thought I is a non-existent thing. It has no independent existence, reality of its own. The existence of the I is dependent on the space in which it arises. The thought I cannot arise without the space that it arises in. But that space that it arises in does not need the thought I for it to arise. So there's very clear statements in the message of not to. One is being, all that is required to realize the self, big S self, is to be still. And you are what you're looking for. So you already are reality before the head tries to sell reality as its interpretation. So all that is required is to be still. And then what cannot be still is not you. So it gets negated. The message to me is that simple. What is being perceived is not what is perceiving. That would, all of your thoughts, ideas, the sense of me, all of that is perceived. You can hear all of that from before it. Whatever is being heard is not what is hearing. So any question that comes up in your system, you can hear that. Yes? So if you have faith in this message of not to, which has proven very faithful to me, then that's really all you need. What is being perceived is not what is perceiving. Now your head is claiming everything and saying, I'm perceiving that. But when the mental movement happens, you can perceive it. So really, it's a false perception. And that false perception is based only on the past. So whatever is being perceived, you can perceive when you're listening to this satsang. You can perceive your head trying to figure it out, or saying that it can't figure it out, or it's claiming that it's got it. Yeah? You can perceive all of that, so it's not what is perceiving. Meaning what is doing that is not you. Yeah? So really the bondage of self is an identification with what we're not. There is no thing called self. There's a mental movement happening, but it says it's arising to me, but when you investigate the me, there is no me. It's just part of the mental movement, and you can perceive all of that. So it's like Ganga Mira would say, don't touch the mind, yeah? Because you can perceive it, you can hear it. What is being heard is not what is hearing. And you can hear that mind. You can hear the mental system. You can perceive the senses. You can perceive this body. Or that body, yeah? That is being perceived, so it is not what is perceiving. Meaning don't touch it. Because it ain't you. Yeah? That is not your nature. So for that investigation to go on, oftentimes the individual needs to be turned down. Listening is very effective for that, because listening sits you in the seat of not mental movement. It's just listening. And then there's embodiment stuff you can do to do that as well. So, but those messages, they're very succinct, yeah? What is being perceived is not what is perceiving. Huang Po said that, but Nisargadatta said that as well. What is being perceived is not what is perceiving. You can perceive the body, and you can perceive the thoughts, and you can perceive the emotions. You can perceive the ideas and the beliefs. All of that can be perceived from before it. You can perceive your head claiming when it hears this message to get it or not get it. You can perceive all of that, yeah? So what can't stay still is what's in a dualistic relationship. Because the sense of subjectivity, which is arising as me, is often changing in relation to the different objects, which it's perceiving, yeah? But you can perceive that interpretation of those objects. I'm just going to look at the thing here. Hmm. Yeah, so I'll just stay on what I'm saying. What is being perceived cannot be what is being perceived is not what it's perceiving yet. So it doesn't take long, even in negation, when you're meeting things with I'm not that, I'm not that, I'm not that. It doesn't take you very long to see that you can perceive the negation. Meaning the sense of being the one who's seeing things that it's not, yeah? That's why Ramana says in the who am I inquiry, it ends in silence. Meaning you don't continually repeat who am I, who am I, who am I, yeah? Because what is repeating that is not you. You can perceive that inquiry. So it's a method to sit you back into the space in which that inquiry arises. But once that happens, there's no more inquiry. You put the tool down in many ways. It's the same with listening. You can hear sounds outside of you, and you can hear the head interpret those sounds. So it's like the listening steps back, in a way. You can hear the body. You can hear the beliefs. You can hear the judgments that the mental system is making. You can hear the sense of you being the hearer, because there is no hearer, there's only hearing. And then that space of listening is still, and everything's moving through that space. You can only know the unreal, meaning what is moving, from a non-point, let's say, or a point of stillness, yeah? So you can only know movement from an opposition, which would be stillness. So obviously there's a stillness which is highlighting all of the movement. Now that could be movement of the body, the world, or the mental system. But there's something which is an open stillness which is noticing all of this movement. Now all of that movement can only exist within the space of stillness. Otherwise it has no existence of its own, yeah? But that open space of stillness does not need movement. So it's like the Banki thing. You are the unborn. The body is born and the body will die. The thinking is born and it dies. The sense of me, the thought I, is born and dies. Many, many times, probably throughout the day, yeah? The idea of you comes and goes. So there's a birth and a death. And then he's saying, you are the unborn. So whatever is coming and going through birth and death must not be your nature. And that space of stillness, let's say, in which the birth, life, and death happens within, has no part to play in the birth, life, and death, meaning it's untouched by the events of this. So rather than trying to become open space as a bunch of movement, movement cannot become stillness, yes? But a lot of spiritual practice is run under this idea that this movement is going to become a non-thing as stillness. And it can't do it because that's not its nature. The nature of this body and mental system is movement. You are not the body and the mind. This is the message, yeah? You are already the open stillness. So the more attempts we make at trying to become stillness as what cannot become still, the more failure there will be. So really the movement is a negation. Yeah? It's like Sri Brahman in India says, practice is only for the unnatural. Yeah? So he would say stillness is your nature. So what is of not your nature is a bunch of movement, yeah? It's of the nature of individuality, a bunch of movement. And that individuality is not going to lose its sense of individuality. The sense of I will constantly arise as the sense of I. It's not going to go beyond that. Not because you're not trying hard enough, but because it can't do it. Yeah? You are not the sense of I. So when you see that sense or that thought pop up, you negate it as what you are. And then this whole event becomes quite musical because you're no longer bound to the outcome of this event. So, as they would say in recovery, the bondage of self, please release me from the bondage of self. Well, the bondage of self is an identification with what we're not. And the identification with what we're not is our being identified as a sense of me. Now, there is a sense of me, but that ain't you. So there is a sense of me arising, for sure. But the bondage of self is listening to that idea and all of the ideas that come after it, which are conditioned, rather than just openly listening. So there's the habit of attaching or grasping on to the sense of me. And when that's grasped onto, you are bound to everything that comes after that, which is all of the mind and the body, all of its interpretations, all of its perceptions, and everything else. So really the only investigation, if there is investigation, is into that sense of me. Where is that and what is that? Is that a thing? Because if it's not a thing, then I wouldn't be bound to everything that that comes after it, which is relating to it. So there's a sense of me, but if I'm not that sense of me, I would love to know that. And then you will probably stop coming to these talks, because who cares at that point, yeah? What's presented by the head, because it's not arising, what it's arising to is not you. You are before that even, yeah? In the seat of not to. So practice is only for the unnatural, as Sri Brahman would say. Practice is to settle down all of the movement so it can slow down enough that you can see you're not what's in front of it. Or you're not what it's arising to, yeah? So when we do chanting and listening stuff, there's a point of listening which is sound. Yeah, that's just to settle the mental movement. And then you see when the head pops up that you can hear that as well. Yeah. So the sense of being the listener to the sound that's happening, you can hear that pop up. You can hear your head say, I'm the listener. So that must not be the listening. You can perceive your sense of being the one who's listening to this talk. You can perceive that, and what is being perceived is not what is perceiving. What is being perceived is not what is perceiving. And that brings a lot of lightness to the body, because the mental system, when it's trying to get out of itself, which is most spiritual practice, by the way, when it's trying to get out of itself, it's a ton of weight. It's like the heaviest thing that you can lift. The heaviest non-thing you can lift is the idea of trying to get out of yourself. Self cannot get out of self, but its attempts to do so can get very obscene and very extreme. So to see that there is no self puts a really beautiful end to every time the head tries to make a move and say, okay, I have to do this huge thing, or I have to make this huge whatever. Yeah, I got to spend $10,000 on this retreat because I got to get out of myself. Well, it can't get out of itself. So if you see there is no self, which there is no self, when the head makes the move, you know in a way it's an illusion, yeah? It's an appearance. And it's presenting all of the suffering based on the idea of me. So all of the depressive thoughts which I used to have all the time were all based on the idea of me. Now if there is no me, which Buddhism says there is no me, and non-duality points out that that sense of me is arising as another thought, not a thing, which is why they say there is no self, then all of those depressive thoughts are referencing nothing, essentially. Yeah. But if I'm listening to those thoughts based on the idea of me, then I'm completely bound to those thoughts, and that will put this body through hell. And then I'll want to get out of this body, but as a body, because I'll be identified as it, and then we're drinking, yes? So if all of those depressive thoughts about me are coming up, but I'm not the appearance of the idea of me, and there is no thing called me, then those thoughts have no platform to land on, yeah? And when they have no platform to land on, they don't get life, because they're only getting life based on the personalness of those being my thoughts and my depressive problems, yes? What happened to me, what is happening to me, and what is going to happen to me, past, present, and future, all based on the sense of me. But if there is no me, which there is no you, you are an idea, as Shunryu Suzuki would say, then this is great news, because when your head presents all of its mayhem, it has nowhere to land. Yeah? That brings a great relief, because the head is going to keep trying to get out of itself. Because you're not the doer, because there is no doer. The mental system is a conditioned movement. So, that in a way is why these talks happen. That in a way is why we do the listening and the chanting things. Because you listen to sound, and the head calms down, and then when you see the head pop up, you see that you can hear the head. Yeah, which brings up a great question. I'm not the head. Yeah. Or let's say the great question is maybe I'm not the head. So you can investigate that. Because the whole time you think that you're the listener to the thoughts. But there is no listener. There's just an open listening. And if there's no listener to what you're hearing, yeah, then what is being heard does not touch open listening. It will kill the listener, the idea of the listener. Yeah? But if you can hear that sense of being the listener, that must mean you're not it. Yeah? And then if there's an inquiry into the body, where is the listener? Where is the J? There ain't one in there. It's just a mental movement. It's an attachment. There's one great Tibetan teacher, I forget his name, but he says, essentially, our sense of identity is just an emotional attachment. Yeah. Nice. Okay. So Ramana says all that you need to do is be still. What can't be still is what you are not. So it gets negated as what you are. What cannot be still is what you're not. That gets negated as your being, as what you are. What is being perceived is not what is perceiving, is saying the same thing. Whatever is moving is being perceived. So that is not what is perceiving that movement. So you are before, essentially. The only requirement is to see the unreal. The unreal meaning an autonomous reality of its own. So whatever is moving is constantly presenting itself. Specifically, the mental system is like constantly presenting itself over and over again based on the mental movement of me. That has no reality of its own. It's just a repetitive habit in a way. And the head is conditioned to do that, and that's what it's doing. So if you see the unreal, it's moving. And then you would see that from reality, which is the unmoving space in which it moves through. And then Nisargadatta would say, camp yourself there. Meaning, don't move from there. That's beautiful, because it's simple in a way. Very simple. Those statements are very direct. And it's kind of all you need, yeah? Because you see your head come up with a question, but you can perceive it. So that would end the idea of being the questioner. Yeah. All right. So we'll do any questions. And if not, maybe we can end it or something. I don't know. I don't even know if there's anybody out there. Hey there, Samya. Or if there's something that you want to talk more on, you can write it in the chat. Feel free. I got my website going again, so you can always check that too. It's theskyIsAlwaysClear.com. There's some music and stuff on there, so. Jesse, how do you quiet those persistent thoughts? You don't quiet those persistent thoughts. Yeah? This is a negation. How do you quiet those persistent thoughts? Really, you would investigate being the thinker of those thoughts. The persistence of your thinking is completely reliant on those being your thoughts. Thoughts have no persistence. They only get fuel from what's before them, which is the sense of you being the thinker of those thoughts, or those being your thoughts. Yeah. So, inquiring into who those thoughts are, those are my thoughts. Where in the body does that my come from? What is that my? Yeah? Because those thoughts, emotions, sensations are arising in your experience, but they get all of the life and fuel from the sense that they're yours. So don't worry so much about the thoughts. Look at the idea of the thinker. If you come to the chanting things, you listen to sound, you don't worry so much about the sound, but you begin to hear the idea of being the listener. And what is being perceived is not what is perceiving. Yeah? So the persistency of the thinking is completely reliant on the idea that they're your thoughts. If those were not your thoughts, you would brush them so they wouldn't even land on anything. Yeah? My thoughts are not bothering you, but your thoughts seem to be bothering you. So that would be based on the idea of my, yours. Yeah? So the inquiry is, who is that my? Is there a my, for one? Because Buddhism says there is no self. So there is no one who those thoughts are arising to, yeah? You, the idea of the thinker is an idea. Yeah. Jesse is an idea. Now that idea needs to be investigated inside the body to see that there is no Jesse aside from the idea. Yeah? The persistent thoughts are a conditioned movement. Yeah? And we were saying, the persistency of them is based on the you. So this is looking at the you. The thoughts are going to keep appearing. Probably not in the frequency or persistency that they are appearing, but they will continue to appear because there's no doer of those thoughts. Actually, the attempts to stop the thinking is probably sticking you more to being the thinker. And the more you get stuck to the idea of being the thinker, the more persistent your thoughts become. This is why meditation can drive people crazy, oftentimes. Because they're trying to get out of something that they're not in the first place. Yeah? So the persistence of the thoughts is based on the you. Essentially, it's based on the idea that those are your thoughts. So really, like Ramana says, there's only one thing to investigate, which would be I, which would be the thought I. You see that you are a thought that comes and goes, and then all of the thoughts which pertain to you, once you see that there is no you, essentially aside from a thought, they lose their grip, they lose their power, yeah? Because you see that they're referencing a non-thing. And you see that from before it, which is where you actually sit. Yeah? So the idea of getting rid of persistent thoughts, if you're working from the standpoint that you're the thinker of those thoughts, I would suggest from my own experience and just hearing people, it ain't going to work, really. That's why Advaita is free from self, not as self. So trying to get rid of the persistence of thoughts as self is not going to work, because the persistency of those thoughts is completely based on the idea of a self. So if it's me trying to stop persistent thoughts, there's always going to be a sense of me, which is going to give a lot of life to those thoughts. Those thoughts might pause for a moment, but they're coming back. Yeah. So this is not about killing thought. Yeah. It's seeing that you're not the thinker, essentially, that there is no thinker of those thoughts. And then the persistency goes way down, because it's essentially saying, the thoughts arise, but there's a knowing that they arise to know one specific individual thing. Yeah? But how persistent thoughts become is based on the idea that they're your thoughts, for sure. That's because they have no life. Thoughts are no different than a fart, yeah? It's just a movement of energy. And then it's given tons of life and meaning from I, from me. Yeah. Tracy, you find that out. For us to talk about what we are is useless in a way. You can't, to talk about the wordless would make no sense, yeah? It would make the wordless into a form, and then it gets very odd. Then the head tries to become something which it can't become more. So really, we look at two-ness here, because what is being perceived is not what is perceiving. You cannot perceive what you are. Yeah, you can only perceive what you're not. That's why what is being perceived is not what is perceiving. Because what is perceiving the perceived cannot be perceived, because it's what you are perceiving. So really, the investigation highlights what you're not, and then not touching what you're not. Or seeing that you're not it. And then you will sit back into what you already are. But you are not going to become awareness. Yeah? Awareness is your nature, and that from awareness you are aware of a bunch of stuff. But the stuff that we're aware of, we become identified as that. So this is saying, these talks are looking at what you're aware of and saying, you see that, you can perceive that, you can hear that mental system. Yeah, so you are aware of that, meaning you mustn't be that mental system. And then what you are, let that be revealed by seeing what you're not, which is everything that you can perceive or can hear. Because otherwise your head is going to constantly ruminate on what you are as what you're not. And what the mental system cannot become it can't become open listening. Yeah? In many ways, you and me are never going to get it. That's the point. You're never going to get it. You get that you're never going to get it, not because you're failing, because you can't get it. Yeah? Because you are before what's trying to get it. So don't meet these talks with a bunch of conceptual thinking and grabbing on. This is a negation. Negation. Yeah? What is being perceived is not what is perceiving. Ramana says the only requirement is to see the unreal. To see the unreal is the only requirement, because you can see what you're not. The only requirement is to see the unreal. He's not saying the only requirement is to see the unreal and then think about the unreal and then ruminate on the unreal, because what would be doing all of that thinking and ruminating is the unreal. Yeah? That would be more persistent thought. Yeah. So who is it that's trying to figure out who you are? And the answer to that question would be me, or I'm trying to figure it out. Well, you can perceive that I. You can hear the thought I. Yeah? And what is being perceived is not what is perceiving. What is being heard is not what is hearing. And it will continue to be heard because your mental system is conditioned. You're not doing that. Your head is trying to get out of itself and it can't. It can't do it. But if we're identified as it, we'll continue to try to get out of ourselves. And then if you see you're not that, it will continue to try to get out of itself. But you're not that, because you can hear it. So like we mentioned a lot here, so a lot of people need to, the body needs to be relaxed and the individuality needs to be turned down. Another way to say that is the listening needs to be made more subtle, which is why we do the listening exercises. And why on my website there's a link to YouTube where there's like 100 hours of that stuff. Listen to sound, like we were saying. The mental system calms down a little bit because you're listening, and then it pops up and you can hear that. So now the idea of being the one who's listening to the music gets put into question because you can hear that. And then the seat you sit in as the listener also switches. Because, I'm before that mental system. And then your head will go, I'm before that mental system, but you can hear that as well. That's great. You're seeing the unreal, yeah? All right. Just going to check this thing. What? Well, there is no self, yeah? The ego, the sense of the ego would be identified with thinking, yeah? Thinking would be the ego. Who is that ego arising to? You, yeah? So who wants to know what enlightenment is? You do. Yeah, so you're back to the you again. Does that make sense to you, Jesse? It's like they say in the program, let's not get caught up in mental abstractions, yeah? The sense of the ego is thinking. Yeah. Now, a lot of people think they're going to kill that thinking or something, but they're not doing that thinking because there is no them as a doer who's doing the thinking in the first place. But you can get lost in the idea of killing the ego for your whole life in many ways if you don't see that there's no thinker. So this message keeps pointing back to you. So who is the one who wants to know what enlightenment is? Free. If you say free of self, there is no self. And if you say free of the ego, who is it that gets free of the ego? Because this message would say you are what you're looking for, yeah? Advaita would essentially say you are the Atman or the Brahman, which would be the Absolute. So if you are already that, then whatever is trying to grab on to these ideas mustn't be you. Yeah? So the investigation is who's trying to grab onto those ideas. It's the same one who all of those persistent thoughts are arising to. And a lot of those persistent thoughts are based on that question right there. A lot of the persistent thoughts and the want to get free is based on an idea of freedom, which would be based on the idea of not being free, which immediately puts the head in a state of duality, which is its nature, but it ain't your nature. So who is it that wants to know whether it's free of self or free of the ego? You, yeah? The same you who's bothered by persistent thoughts. The same you who wants to get out of one situation, let's say individuality, and into whatever an enlightened situation might be. Yeah? It's all based on the you. Now there is no you. But when your head tries to understand that, it can't grasp it. So you have to inquire that into your body so that you sit into a knowing before mental knowing. Because mental knowing is really useless because you are not of the mental. So mental knowing has a very short lifespan, essentially. It's got a very low ceiling. It essentially stops right there where you're asking, yeah? So you've got to see who is it that wants to know that. Because all of the ideas of enlightened or not enlightened are based on the idea of me. Otherwise, if there's no me to be enlightened or not enlightened, then those ideas have no weight. The same way the persistent thoughts have no weight if they're not based on a me. Yeah? It's no different than the wind blowing, essentially. But if it's my wind, then, well, I don't want you to have my wind, and I don't want you to get this and this and this. So when your head comes up with what is enlightenment, you can perceive that clearly. That's like easy to see. Thinking is easy. You can say, you're not your thoughts to anybody, and they would go, yeah, that's right. I'm not my thoughts. Yeah? But the sense of them is what's saying that. And it's the sense of them who's not the thoughts, which has them completely bound to the thoughts. And that sense of them will deny that it's the thinker, but it will be bound to those thoughts. Yeah? It will be bound to the thought that I'm not the thoughts. It'll be bound to the thinkerness. And that's not very comfortable. Because it's not your true seat. And there's a lot of tension in that false seat of being the thinker of those thoughts. So really the question is the you, the me, the my, self, small s self. Like they say in the big book, yeah? Self-reliance has failed us in the recovery system. Self-reliance has failed us. How does self present itself? Through the thinking. What is one of those thoughts? Me. If I rely on me and the thinking, I will fail. That's how I became an alcoholic in the first place. Yeah? Because the conditioning of those thoughts is interpreting life as a very fearful situation. And if I'm listening to those thoughts as those thoughts, I'm going to be living an extremely fearful life. So self-reliance is what has failed us. That would say self-reliance and self mustn't be me. Yeah. So that gets a spotlight gets put on that through non-duality and Advaita. There is no me. Wow. So all of those thoughts which are referencing a me are referencing only their own interpretation. You can perceive all that. You can hear all of that. What is being heard is not what is hearing. That would put a kaput to all that's being heard as being what you are, yeah? That would end the whole game with one statement. That's the beauty of those statements. That's the beauty of Ramana's statement. All you have to do is be still. What can't be still, you are not that. Yeah? So when that movement comes up, you don't touch it. You sit back into the hearing rather than going with what is heard. Then the head goes, what is enlightenment? You can perceive that. It's not what is perceiving. I really want to know how to get free. Who wants to know that? I do. You can perceive all of that, yeah? You can perceive all of that. You can perceive your eyes right now. Your eyes are looking at something, I assume anyways, if they're open. You can perceive, you can feel your eyes. And you can perceive your eyes looking at an object. What is being perceived is not what is perceiving, okay? I can hear sounds right now. There's like cicadas outside because it's super hot everywhere in Toronto for some reason. I can hear that, yeah? So that's being heard. It's great. And then I can hear my head say, I can hear that. So I must not be the head which is claiming those to be cicadas and the head that's saying, I can hear that. That is the mental system claiming whatever is arising, which it will continue to do because that's its nature. Yeah, it's going to claim everything as happening to you. So you are the one who wants to get free, and meaning based on you being the one who is bound. If you don't keep the inquiry on the you, you end up chasing the other ideas, and that will go on forever. That will, because the thinking will just constantly try to get out of itself forever. That's just how it works, yeah? So that's why Ramana says you stay on the first person, meaning the I thought or the me. Because as soon as you leave the inquiry into the I, you chase all the other thoughts. And once that chasing is going on, you've lost the inquiry on the sense of me is lost. Yeah? And all of the other thoughts are based on you. The thought you. So really the only investigation is into you. And these talks can only point towards that. Because that is the pivot point of suffering. Why? Because that's the pivot point of duality. Without a me, there's no you. Yeah? Without a me, there's no you. So the head is constantly saying me, 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 me. But you are not the head which is saying me. That is not what you are. Yeah? So when you don't go with the me, then the whole basis of me and you, which is duality, that whole thing loses all of its light or strength, let's say, when you sit back into what you are, which is the hearing. Not being the hearer of the head, but open hearing. And then the you and me loses all of its weight. And when the me loses all of its weight, what comes after it loses all of its weight? Like I'm worthless. Like these people are better than me. Like this person sucks. Like I hate this. Like I want to get out of this. Like I need to be enlightened. Like I'm completely in bondage. All of that loses its weight because it's all based on me. The whole thing is based on me. Yeah? There's a bike in front of me. The whole idea, concept, seeing of that bike as a bike separate from me is based completely on the idea of me. And that is not reality. These things are entangled, yeah? That is not an independent reality. Unreal. Yeah. So, when it comes to that question, what is this and what is that? It's all based on the me. Who wants to know? Yeah. I think the silence within is to experience my soul. However, the mind serves. Great. Who knows all of that? Yeah? You. Well, you're not the you who knows all of that. So the information, in AA they say self-knowledge avails you nothing. And they're talking about mental knowledge. Mental knowledge, as far as peace goes, its currency is nil. Mental knowledge, to me, has no power in the currency of peace. And all of that mental knowledge only gets power based on the me who knows it. That's one of the beautiful things about Advaita, about not to, and the 12 steps, is it's not based on mental knowledge. It is not based on mental knowledge. Listening is not based on mental knowledge. You can hear mental knowledge clearly. And being the one who knows a lot is a huge weight to carry. Because that weight is if you know a bunch of stuff, then there's a sense that you're not gonna know. Or there's always more to know. And there's no value as far as peace and relief goes. So, I come from a world of sobriety, and in that world, self-knowledge avails you nothing. Meaning, knowledge held by small s self avails me nothing. And when that's met with Advaita or not to, it avails me nothing because it's not my knowledge. And all of the knowledge we have about silence is noise, essentially. You can hear that clearly. I know you can hear that because you are what you're looking for. You are open space before that knowledge pops up. So the mind might serve distractions from obtaining nothingness because you can't obtain nothingness. Yeah? You are open nothingness now. What's trying to obtain that cannot obtain it. And it's serving up tons of abstractions and distractions from obtaining nothingness because it can't do it. Yeah? A movement that's presenting itself to be a thing cannot become a not thing as that movement. Movement cannot become stillness. So the mind is serving up a bunch of distractions because it's trying to obtain nothingness. You can perceive that, which means you are not that, so negate it. Negate it. Negate it as what you are. The idea of nothingness is a bunch of movement. And that movement, trying to become stillness, will put you in a complete anxiety of persistent thoughts. So now the previous question makes a lot of sense. If you are trying to obtain nothingness as a thing, as a mental presentation which is presented as a thing, that will never end. And that will induce tons of anxiety. And that anxiety, in a way, is rightfully presented because the mental system cannot become its idea of nothingness. The mental system is movement. Like music, for instance, is movement. That music is never going to become stillness. That music moves through an open field of stillness, but it is not going to become stillness. So the idea of nothingness is a movement through the space of nothingness, which is already there. And the idea of nothingness will never become open, spacious, silent nothingness, because it can't. It cannot do it. Yeah? And the idea of me is the same thing. So the only movement is negation, not acquiring. Any acquiring is self-knowledge, and that avails us nothing. It's super valuable to see that, because your head will consistently present the anxiety of persistent thoughts of trying to become a still thing. And when you can negate that movement, it takes down the weight like 100%, because you can stop trying to become something that it can't become, because you're not the mental movement. So it's negation. So again, it's back to who? Whose mind is serving distractions, and who is trying to obtain nothingness? Me, me. Great. So that puts you back on the me. Who am I? What is that me? Beautiful. That's great, because it highlights so much. Spiritual seeking is based completely on the idea of being the seeker. If there is no seeker, then that seeking has no weight at all. If there is no seeker, then the seeking has no weight. And this message is a negation of the seeker. Or let's say an inquiry into the seeker. The same way that listening is an inquiry into the listener.